Welcome back, gang. It's Delty from Deltiasgaming.com here with an updated build for the Magic Warden, which is frankly my least favorite PvE class in the game. You're probably asking, why in the world am I making a build video on it then? Well, because it's much, and I mean much more powerful, and I wanted to share with you what has changed and what I came up with in case you're interested in this obscenely powerful build. I completed both Trifecta, Veteran, Maelstrom Arena, and Veteran Vatashram Hollows, that's no death, speed, and no sigils with ease. I also solo the newest Wandering boss in Update 36 Zone, which has 10 million HP. It's that strong solo, and you can adopt this for a group. This video will cover the usual skills, gear, champion points, and more with flexible options all around with the solo player in mind. Check the timestamps below in the link description to jump ahead to specific spots, and also hit that like button and get that thumb up if you got something out of this video. Let's jump in with what's changed with Lord Warden. The first thing that will change on Update 36 with the Warden is the Advanced Species passive. In the class kit, this passive now increases your critical damage done rather than your penetration. This is a big boost for slotting animal companion skill lines on your front or back bar. The reason why is the passive for the light armor users do not give you any critical damage because they come from the medium armor via the dexterity passive. So light armor users have much less critical damage. There is a critical cap of 125% of critical damage. So light armor users really want to take advantage and get as much critical damage as possible. Meanwhile, the light armor user can get a lot of penetration because they get that built in with the light armor passive concentration. So what this means is, as a light armor user, you want to have a good blend of penetration, critical damage, and crit chance. And now with this passive being altered to this, you have exactly that huge boost to damage. The next passive to change is Piercing Cold. This passive now increases your damage done by 2%, which increases up to 12% on the latest PTS notes, when I played it, while wielding an ice staff, rather than increasing your magic and frost damage by 10%. Simply put, Ice Staff is the most damage producing if you run a frost-based Warden now. You can front bar it or you can double bar it, and it does great, outperforming all other destruction staffs and even dual wield. You also have an extra benefit with Ice Staff and block mitigation, making you very tanky and a lot of damage producing, especially if you run Ice Staff in the group with the chilled status effect. Everyone's going to want a frost-based Warden in their group. Think of them as the new Zen DK. So before I jump into kind of some gear sets and what to use and why, pros and cons of knowing about the Warden, where I see this specific magic-based Warden doing good and doing poorly. You have really good damage and it's pretty fun to play. You got a lot of speed, you're managing the Deep Fissure and some other abilities. I like it. It has amazing passives and buffs. It's great for group utility and it's even really good solo because you have great survivability. The two issues I see with the class and the playstyle is it's difficult to resource sustain. I found a way around this using a little bit more hybrid type build. Relying on some stamina based abilities has been very helpful. Also, you are reliant on the pet ultimate for optimal damage. I do swap it in and out for solo play just depending on the situation because sometimes it dies, but the pet will do crazy amounts of damage for you. In fact, it's one of the highest damage producing ultimates in the game and you really got to use it. So let's talk about the skills and what I came up with and why. So the front bar choice, I think it's pretty obvious by now, and that's Ice Staff with Update 36 giving us a huge boost to the damage. You're talking 12% more on our front bar, outperforming everything else. So working left to right on my bar, I go with Deep Fissure. This is 3 seconds and 6 seconds. It's going to fire off, cost magic, and it's going to inflict major and minor breach. Absolutely fantastic, huge damage. And this is kind of what you're babysitting. This got changed to 3 and 6 seconds. So think of it as a 9-second dot you're going to have to recast and maintain a lot. Next ability up is Blue Betty. This is our resource sustain tool. It's going to give us major brutality and sorcery, and we want to keep it on our front bar because the animal companion passive Advanced Species gives us more critical damage for slotting animal companion abilities. Next up is Growing Swarm. This is the stamina based morph, and it's going to convert this into a bleed, and it's going to give minor vulnerability, which is very nice. So this specific spot on your bar, I typically go with some type of bleed. When I like playing solo specifically, this was helpful because the duration was long, the damage was pretty high, and it also cost stamina. So the stamina cost frees me up on the magic, and that's what helps my resource sustain, is dipping a little bit into stamina-based skills like this. Now you have your main spammel, which is going to seem very odd, but it will make a massive amount of sense once we get to the gear sets, and that's Destructive Reach combined with the Master's Dragon Star Arena weapon. When we use this, it's going to give us 600 spell damage for a brief time. More on that later. So it's going to do an okay amount of magic damage up front, and it's going to do a decent amount of magic damage over time. And the initial hit always applies the elemental status effect. Think Chilled. The Chilled status effect also can apply Minor Brittle, increasing critical damage done to the target. You have to have a Frost Staff equipped to do this to proc Minor Brittle, but this is going to increase your damage and your group's damage, and why that's so important for solo or group play to understand. Minor Brittle is extraordinarily important, and your Warden is going to be rocking in it because of this ability and some others. Now we're going to get to a passive slottable, and that's Bird of Prey. This is where your major expedition comes into play. You're going to get Minor Berserk for simply slotting this, and you're going to get the Animal Companion passive for slotting on your front bar. Makes your bar a little bit more simple. Next up is the ultimate of choice. I've talked about this a little bit earlier, but that's Wild Guardian. This is going to convert it into a physical-based bleed damage ability that kind of acts like an execute. It's very low cost, 75 ultimates. You're going to be activating this frequently. Deals 100% more damage to enemies below 25% HP. This thing can hit up to 80,000 in groups and even higher in a raid fully buff. It also has a chance to apply a really important status effect, the Hemorrhage status effect. So bleed damage, Hemorrhage status effect, you're going to be dripping in status effects and damage. I do swap this out from time to time depending with different ultimates, usually Flawless Dawnbreaker on the front and then Shooting Star on the back. The reason I do that is some solo instances, this thing will die frequently to lava or whatnot. Now to the back bar, and you have a lot of different ways to play this. Two predominantly successful ways I've played this and used this. The solo play, I typically run the two-handed. The reason why I run a two-handed is combined Stampede, which is our two-handed physical damage and high stamina cost ability, with a VMA two-hander. I have a massive hard-hitting gap closer that gives me a lot of AoE and single target pressure and offloads some of the magic costs that I have. Two-hander advantage is you have a really hard-hitting, big, massive AoE that does great single target damage as well. The benefit of the Eye Staff is obviously you get that passive increased damage on your back bar. It's going to be a bit more difficult to resource sustain, especially when you're playing solo, however, is what I found actually playing this. Two abilities that are commonly used, and I would recommend if you want to go with the Eye Staff, but keep in mind, I like the two-handed. One is Elemental Susceptibility. This skill got reworked in the upcoming patch and will basically reapply 3 status effects at all times. So this is going to add a lot of damage to you and your group. The reason I didn't like this for solo is I already had a lot of status effects running, specifically the Chilled status effect a lot of the time. And I already had Major Breach running, so it was a bit redundant, but that's something I would slot out for. Also, Unstable Wall of Elements with the Frost Staff is also a really good alternative. Me personally, I found it best to resource sustain, survive, and have high mobility running a two-handed with Stampede, though I understand that looks and feels a little bit goofy for players. Moving along to what else I used and why is Channel Acceleration on my back bar. This is Psijic Order. It's going to give her crit damage buff, and it's going to give it for a very long time. It costs 1.3 seconds of time to cast this, but you're going to get 60 seconds of minor force. So typically I cast this before I charge into battle for that huge buff and a little bit of movement speed. Now, if you don't have Psijic Order, can't stand getting it, I can relate. I would go with Barb Trap from Fighter's Guild on your back bar instead, or even put it on your front bar. It's a very high damage ability, it gives minor force. You have to be in melee range though, however, and it can drain you of some stamina. So you need to play around with the abilities and see what works best, but that's an alternative for Channel Acceleration. Next up is our shield, and I go with Dampening Magic. So I'm not casting a whole lot of shields because I have a lot of survivability coming through skills, but this is one that I use, and it caps on your max HP 60%, and it's based off your max magic. So you're going to get a massive shield when you need it. You're not going to get the magic Return of Harness Magic, though. Usually I use this when I dip below 50% health. I put this on and simply keep attacking because I can get health pretty easily due to a passive and active skill. Speaking of passive and active skill, the skill I'm talking about is Lotus Blossom. This is going to cause your light attacks to restore health and your fully charged heavy attacks to restore health. It's also going to give you 60 seconds of Major Prophecy and Savagery. So with your Netch on the front and Lotus Blossom on the back, you have your two important buffs running most of the time, if you maintain them. Thus, it frees up your potion slot to run really useful potions like Tripods if you struggle with survivability, or even major heroism potions, which gets you back ultimate quicker, allowing you to cast your bear. Kind of a sweaty potion setup to run, but this will increase your survivability of you and your bear dramatically, and you don't have to use Pale Order if you don't want to, just be very survivable solo. But consider this a flex spot if you are going to advance and play into groups. I've already talked about it a little bit earlier, but Elemental Susceptibility is a good slot here, and if you like the 2H on your back bar playstyle, consider Carve as a good alternative if you can stamina sustain. Next up is Winter's Revenge, 12-second damage over time that has a higher chance of applying the chilled status effect, which is good for you and your group, and it does a massive amount of damage in a pretty big radius, so keep this up most of the time. And then we're going to double bar our Wild Guardian on our back bar just to make sure it's completely active and ready to go. Okay, so I have my bar set up and we're going to do the rotation. Typically what you want to do is cast the longest to shortest buff duration. So I'm going to go Channel Acceleration, Lotus, both 60 seconds. I'm going to go to my front bar and then I'm going to cast my Deep Fissure. Deep Fissure will take a second to proc, and then I'm going to cast my Bear at the same time, trying to get it land all at once. So quickly it would look like this. 1, 2, 3, Deep Fissure, Bear, and then Light Attack, Bugs, hit that, Bar Swap, Stampede, Light Attack, and then this is kind of the rotation. 1, 2, and I'm going to wait for Deep Fissure to proc twice. It procs twice, then we're going to do it again. So I'm light attacking and applying this at the same time. Back bar, Winter's Revenge, light attack it a little bit closer, then go to my front bar, throw my guy out, do my bugs, throw this out, and then 1, 2, 3, bar swap. This time's back up, go to my front, Deep Fissure, and I got 1 with me, and Stampede. So my eyes are kind of looking at my timers, and then I'm filling the gaps with this little weave right here. So I'm going to go Deep Fissure, bar swap, cancel that. My bear's back up. I take a potion, I'm a little bit low. Throw my bugs out, go back to my back bar, and Stampede. So you're kind of going back and forth quite a bit. The most important thing to keep up, really, is your Stampede dot on your back, depending on what you're using, and your Deep Fissure. So you're thinking about every, 5 or 6 cooldowns per se, and you're going to have to reapply that. And then you're wanting the timers to go out as quickly as possible and not recast them unless you have to. But this is it. 1, 2, now we're in execute, so I'm going to let everything fall off and just do some main spammables here. You can see the bear is hitting really hard. And so that's what it looks like just on a 3 mil parse dummy. Now, you'd have to change up the build significantly if you wanted to do really high DPS on a 21 mil, but this will give you everything you need. Great survivability, great resource sustain, you can use tripods, you have great movement, and the rotation isn't overly complex, what I highly recommend using. Okay, let's talk about the gear. And the first 5-piece I'd recommend is typically when you're playing solo, you want to start out with a 5-piece. The best one possible is False God's Devotion. This comes from the Trial Sunspire, so it's a bit more difficult to get, but it carries your resource sustain and your survivability, giving you major expedition and resources back on the 5-piece. Absolutely incredible 5-piece to obtain. I realize not everyone has access to trials and can't really do them, so don't sleep on a set like Withered Hand from Alakir. It's base game. It's going to act as a resource sustaining tool very similar to False Gods, but it's not going to give the magic reduction or major expedition. Bright Throats, believe it or not, is also a decent resource sustaining set if you're using the Witch Mother's Drink. Also, Perfected Bosse's Mania is really good if you want another sweaty trial set and you don't need the resource sustain for some reason. And if you want like super high parse numbers, I would go with Sororia's Perfected Mantle of Sororia. That's what most folks will be using on a parse dummy. It's really made for stationary fights, specifically long-lasting boss fights and trials, or a parse dummy if you want that information. So that's going to be the cornerstone of our gear, is a 5-piece on our body at all times. Now, we are going to use a front bar arena weapon the Master's Ice Staff. This comes from Dragon Star Arena. It's called Perfective Destructive Impact. It's going to add weapon and spell damage as a 2-piece, and it's also going to reduce the cost of Destructive Touch and increase your spell damage by 600 for 4 seconds after activating it. It's a massive boost to your damage, especially on your front bar. So that's going to be on our front bar at all times. Now we're going to go to our back bar set, and that's going to be jewelry, 1 piece on the body, and a weapon, and I go with Pillars of Nirn. Currently, the hardest hitting, easiest to activate proc set in the game. There's some alternatives to this, but I highly recommend going with the proc set. It plays very well using Stampede to charge in and automatically proccing that bleed damage on your primary target. It hits extraordinarily hard and some decent AoE. Another alternative, if you're not going to run a Master Staff on your front and you don't have access to Pillars of Nirn, is just to change the setup a little bit. What you do is you drop the Master Staff and instead run another 5-piece on your front bar. Here's some options, and then you switch to an arena weapon on your back bar or something like Willpower, which just gives you a little bit more max magic. Scathing Mage comes from Imperial City Prison. This is now base game, and it gives you a lot of spell damage when doing direct damage. This acts as kind of like a mini Master Frost Staff, though it procs from all direct damage and it doesn't have a 100% proc chance, but it's very, very good. Medusa's coming from Arx Corinium is nice because it grants minor force at all times, specifically when you're on your front bar and it's active, so you can drop a skill like Channel Acceleration or Barb Trap, freeing up your build, making it a bit simpler. And 2 other alternatives. One would be Mother Sorrow. This is base game Overland from Deshawn. It just gives you a lot of critical chance, which is nice when you're on your front bar and you're doing damage. And then also Order's Wrath. This is a craftable set and influences not only your damage done, but your healing, and doesn't require any babysitting or proc sets. So change up the build if you don't have access to Masters and run one of these 5 pieces on your front bar rather than your back bar like Pillars of Nirn. You have a back bar proc set, you have an on the body set, and you have an arena weapon, and that leaves either a mythic or a monster helm. So if you want a super survivability Pale Order, it's a mythic. You have to have the Greymoor or ESO Plus to access this. You're going to collect 5 leads. Check the website if you need to have access to this lead. Restores health when you're dealing damage. It absolutely carries your survivability. It comes in a ring. So you're going to pair the 1-piece Pale Order with a Slime Crawl Monster Helm. Comes from Wayrest Sewers. It's going to give you crit damage. And that's usually the go-to. Currently, the highest damage-producing monster helm is Zon's from Scalecoller's Peak. This is great when playing in melee range, though it does require a DLC dungeon, and the dungeon can be quite difficult. If you don't have access to that, I would go with something like Narayaneth. This is base game and works very, very well because it procs frequently on direct damage. Another set is Iceheart from Direfrost Keep. If you struggle with survivability, don't have access to Pale Order, consider using this, and it does have, well, frost damage. So it fits the bill. Now you're probably asking, Deltia, okay, that's your gear sets. Where's all the frost damage sets? Where is the winter set and all these? Well, they actually don't do much damage. So Pillars of Nirn is going to blow it out the water mathematically. Sure, you can go with a theme build if you like, but just realize mathematically, those sets are going to dunk on them most likely. So stick with Pillars of Nirn. There's no babysitting. It's very, very easy to run, whether you run a Frost Staff on your back bar or you run a 2H like I like to do. Now, I'm going to pull up the gear chart here and just run down kind of what I'm using and why. I run 5 light armor and 2 medium since I'm using a bit of stamina, and if you're playing solo, you're probably dodge rolling, breaking free, sprinting, and doing a lot of other things. You need a bit of stamina, so level up that medium armor stamina and the light armor to dip into both passives. You're going to run all magic glyphs, and the traits are going to be all divine if you can. Don't worry about golding out your armor on your body. It doesn't make a big difference unless you're the sweatiest player in the game. Really what you want to gold out and focus on is your weapon and jewelry. That gives you the most bang for your buck, specifically weapons. I'm going to go Frost Staff, the Master's Ice Staff on the front. Precise with the Frost Enchant, hoping to proc some more status effects. You can go with the Charge trait as well, or Nirnhelm. Those are really good options as well. If you don't have the Master Staff, you can always go with something like Willpower, or switch the setup a little bit and run Pillars of Nirn on the front with a back bar VMA Frost or 2-hander. It works just fine. Just you're going to have to replace your main spam bull, make it a little bit different. You're going to go with a Berserker enchant on your back bar, proc set 2H sword, and that way it will maintain a little bit more weapon and spell damage when you're on your front bar. I like the Infuse trait for solo. Bloodthirsty will be better in long fights like trials. Infuse is the way to go if you're doing specifically solo and or dungeon setups. Here's a couple other gear charts. One is for intermediate. I have this listed on the website if you want to run all the breakdown on it. And here's one for a beginner. If you want to run this as a pure beginner, you just start the game. This is all base game material. You can collect it even at level 10 and start running this build. Pretty close to what I've run. We're going to touch on champion points briefly. So the blue tree is usually the most impactful. Couple tips I can give you on the blue tree before we get started. Number one is Reaving Blows. I don't have this selected, but if you don't have Pale Order, you struggle with survivability, consider slotting this instead of one of your damage ones. It will actually keep you alive significantly over other things, so keep that in mind. Number two is taking Eldritch Insight, coming down here into the sub-constellation Staving Death, and taking Preparation. It will take you a little bit of time to get here, but it's 10% damage reduction at all times in PvE. So feel like you need to get this first because you need to survive. Then you can start adding the slottables a little bit later. So the four I go with generally are Wrathful Strikes, increases our weapon and spell damage for all of our damage abilities, very easy. Fighting Finesse, I'm usually playing this solo or maybe in a small group doing a dungeon, so I'm not going to hit critical damage cap typically. And then I go with Deadly Aim and Master at Arms. These are the two go-tos that I typically like. If you get a little bit more serious and a little bit of trials, Fighting Finesse might be the one you flex out depending on how many light and or medium armor you're using. Red Tree, very, very simple here. I go with Balanced Vitality, Fortified, and Rejuvenation along with Siphoning Spells. One trick you can use if you struggle with survivability is consider dropping one of the resource sustain ones and taking the Bastion. It will give you even bigger shields, giving you bigger survivability. Also, if you're dodge rolling a lot, Expert Evasion is not bad, and same with Slippery is not bad. Those four are my staples. Coming over here, Green Tree really doesn't influence performance that much, so I like Gifted Rider, Rationer, Liquid Efficiency, Steed's Blessing. If you need a little bit more extra luck on loot, Treasure Hunter is a really good solid choice. Wrapping up with the miscellaneouses of the build, I go all attributes into magic. I still have enough stamina to cast a few abilities. Stamina-wise, you don't want to drop below 5,000. Typically below 5,000, you're not going to be able to break free and you will die even in solo play. So consider leaving 5,000 in the tank at all times. You can see my magic recovery is pretty good. So if I get all the way buffed up on my front bar, my spell damage is 4,100, right about 60% critical. And if I hit my 600 spell damage, that will go up dramatically, but I like the crit damage significantly, along with these critical rating. 52 and 60% is a really good number for solo. Thief is my Munda Stone. So Thief isn't the most damage producing, it's actually the lover for penetration. Mobs have around 18,200 resistances. So the closest you can get to that pen cap is the better. But remember, we get major and minor fracture, so we can lower the armor by about 10,000. So we're right around 18,000 if we maintain those buffs. So we don't want to use the lover, it'll go over that. And that's why I do it that way. And you can see my recovery across the board is over 1,000 when I have a tripod active with a medicinal use passive Rowan. I'm also a Khajiit on this character. I think the Khajiit, for me, solo is the best due to this critical damage and critical healing buff of 12%. This becomes more or less relevant, I should say, when you get into trials with Warhorns constantly rolling. But for the average player, I've changed some of my races to the Khajiit, and it's absolutely fantastic damage. Now, let's go to the consumable portion of this. I'm on the PTS, that's why I have all these little bags and 3,600 champion points. But I go with the Lion Spell Draft if I'm not going to run that Lotus Blossom or I'm not going to run the Blue Netch. If I want a little bit more damage, I want to rely on Spell Power Potions. Otherwise, it's simple. You just run tripods and you have a resource sustain across the board and a big burst heal when you need it. As far as food goes, it gets a little bit complicated when you get to food, okay? So Clockwork Citrus is very expensive. You can run Witch Mothers, which is a purple version of this, has a little bit less stats, but it's also 10 times less expensive. So consider running that if you're a beginner. Even Crown Store refreshing drinks when you first start out, they get them for free just for logging in. Use those because you really need to recover when you're starting out. Ghastly Eyeball is considered the parse food, so it doesn't have any health associated with it. So if I take this, you can see I'm down to 19,000 health. If I cast some Winner's abilities, I might be up a little bit more. But it's pretty risky to run that typically in content. So I wouldn't necessarily run that because you really want about 22 to 23,000 health at endgame unless you know every single aspect of the game and all of the fights. But consider this, if you want to do the parse nummies, you want to throw on Sororia's Pillars of Nirn and either Harpooner's Kilt or something else, this is what typically people run for parsing. Well, gang, that's a build. I hope you got something out of this. Make sure to hit that like if you did, and also consider subscribing for more builds. I think this build is absolutely fantastic. I was shocked at how well it did solo, and you can adapt it pretty well for a group. Check the link in the description below if you want the written build for this build in case it changes, because we know Elder Scrolls Online changes quite a bit. And last plug, come to twitch.tv/deltiasgaming.com where my mom says I'm the best streamer in the world. Thanks for watching.